I see some noise there from you.
You get a noise from me.
Oh, yes, you are incredibly loud, but
Let me just turn. Maybe I've got my gain up too much.
yeah, that's probably so. I will go sit down and we can start.
Is that better? The noise?
Yes, it's much better.
Yeah, it was the gain. Then I just turned that down.
Great. So we are recording, so we can start. Do you want to do some intro, or I should do, or?
I don't mind. I don't mind.
Okay, so you can do some intro. It's like debate primarily about land ownership, and then whatever topics you bring here.
Okay. Okay. Hello, everybody. My name's Matthew from the Nations of Sanity Project, and I'm here speaking with Urza. We're going to have a conversation primarily about land ownership. We might get onto some other topics if we have time, possibly privatization as well. But the main subject is land ownership. And just to try to sort of introduce the conversation and kind of kick it off, just to give my brief position, which may differ from some other libertarians and anarchists, which is why I'm keen to speak to Urza about this, because it'd be interesting to get his perspective on this. But my position on land ownership is that land itself is not property, and land ownership per se is not actually valid. However, I do consider property ownership valid, and I do consider the occupancy and use of land to house both yourself and your property as valid. So the dominion that you get over land through your property ownership is very similar to land ownership in many ways. But the key difference in my mind is because you don't actually own the land, because you didn't create it, it's just part of our natural environment, you can obviously occupy it and use it with yourself or your rightfully owned property, which you can rightfully own because you can obviously create that. But you can't make arbitrary ownership claims over land that you have no claim to. And one of the reasons why I hold this position is because I look at things like the land enclosure movement throughout history, where I don't see how that flies in line with property rights at all, because it's completely arbitrary ownership claims over large areas of land that they are not occupying with their rightfully owned property, and are not using with any established activity. So that's kind of where I come from. I'm not a commie who doesn't think we can own anything and people can invade your land that you're using that is your rightful dominion. But I'm also not whatever the word is for somebody who would think that property can extend to land. And the problem I have with that position is, where do we then draw the line to prevent arbitrary ownership claims over land and large natural areas where I don't think property rights really justifies it?
Uh, Thank you for your introduction, and hello everybody. I'm glad that I will again discuss with Matthew. It's again hard for me because you know English, but I like to do this even if it's hard for me, because I see I'm growing somewhere, so it's nice for me to do some conversations in English. Um, I just want to ask you about this. Uh, to be honest, it quite surprised me, as we had those conversation in past when you were saying like draw the line between the non-aggression principle and the other stuff and so on. I was somehow supposing that you absolutely you are like okay with land ownership, as most of anarcho-capitalists or libertarians is. And to this, I have such an, I don't know, idea or something like that, that it's like just coming to my head to our previous discussion. I don't want to go too deep to it, but as you said that we can find a line in the sand, like what is okay and what's not. I see like even this is quite a big difference even between you and me and you and most of other libertarians. So it's just showing that it's quite hard to find that line in the sand. However, to this topic about the land ownership, I don't get one thing why the land is so much different from other nature resources. Like it's true that you didn't create the land, but as you say, you didn't create the land, you can't use it, you can't own it. It's like you would say you didn't create the wood, so you can't own the wood. But I think that you can own wood as well as you can own, land. So I don't get why. Where is that difference?
Okay, well, the difference is wood, like, from a tree or something like that, you are attaching your labor to that and separating it from the natural environment. So, like, my point about my problem with land and basically our natural environment and these arbitrary ownership claims is, particularly in the past, but even now, you'll have people like, these woods that I didn't create, that I'm not even using, on my property somehow. And, like, if you build a house, that's very easy for me to understand how that's your property because you created that. Now, if you take some wood, which you obviously didn't create, but you separated it from nature, you use your labor to do that, and use it as a resource. Because the thing is, with our natural environment, it's full of resources that we all have a right to use. I would have had a right to use that wood whilst it was still part of our natural environment before you separated it and made it rightfully yours. So it's not that we can't own things that we didn't create, but we have to attach our labor or our property or something to it to give us that superiority of rights. My point is we all own ourselves equally. None of us have any kind of divine right, to any part of this natural environment, this world that we're born into. But what we can do is we can acquire property right ownerships over materials that we separate from nature and take in as our possessions, or we can create new property through those with those resources, which becomes a new thing that again is our property that we have a right to. The thing is, if you pick an apple from a tree, and we're assuming it's a wild tree, so I had just as much right to pick the apple, but you picked it, so the apple you picked is yours, but the tree isn't. The tree is still, and all the other apples that are on the tree are there for me. Now, what I'm saying is if you built a tree house in that tree, you would be occupying and using that tree and giving you that kind of right, similar to what I'm talking about with land ownership. Now, it's not so much that you own the tree, it's more that you own the tree house, and the tree is housing that. Just like it's not so much I own the land underneath my house, but assuming I own my house, I own my house and I'm occupying and using the land. And the example I often use when I make this analogy is I say, look, if me and you are just standing in the wilderness, you're standing on a spot of land and I'm standing on a spot of land. Neither of us own either spots of land, but while we are standing there with our bodies that we do own, we have a dominion over that area, which serves pretty much the same as land ownership. And in many for many intents and purposes, it may seem like a pretty like a pedantic definition, like, oh, it's technically not property, but it kind of is in all intents and purposes with regard to the fact that you have it right over it over other people and all the rest of it. But my point is that your right over that land is attached to your ownership over yourself and your property that is occupying and using your land. You don't actually own the land per se as property. Does that make sense?
Uh, Quite. It's interesting that I just wanted to ask you about the example with the treehouse, and you said it before I asked. So, for example, but look, if I build a house of wood, such a wooden house, I chop the trees and I build a house, so the wood is mine and the house is mine. But if one of the corners of the house would be a actual living tree, and I would like put my house to there, you say that I own the other woods, but not that living tree. But i- yes, is it like that?
Sorry, give me the example again. So you own an area of land and the tree is in the land. Sorry, the tree is
No, no.
within the
There
property
is
area.
no. There is a house, and I just have two examples. The first example is the house is like I just chop all the trees and I built just wooden house there.
Yeah.
But the other example is that one of the corner of the house is made of the actual living tree. That there is a living tree, and I just somehow connected the other woods to it. So in such case, I own all the house except of that one corner, which is made of the tree, which is still living.
No, I would say that you own the whole house, including the living tree that's become part of your property, because it's become part of your property now. So,
And what is the difference between this and the tree house?
well, I would say that the tree house isn't. I mean, I suppose you could argue that it depends how the tree house is constructed, but assuming it's basically like a house on top of the tree, you could argue that the tree is just housing the property, and the property is the tree house, just like the land is housing your house. But your house. So I'm saying that your property is the house, whether it's your house on land or a house on a tree. The tree or the house underneath it is just what's housing it at that time. So let's say, for example, if you took your tree house out and left, what ownership claim would you then have for that tree after that point? That's kind of my point. I'm saying the tree isn't, and it's the same with your land. If you didn't have your house there, that's what I'm saying. Like your ownership over, or your dominion, sorry, over the land or over the tree, and I'm trying to apply the same consistency to both situations. Your dominion over both, which serves very much like land or like property ownership, only exists based on your actual property that it's housing. So, just like when you don't stand on that spot anymore, I can come and stand on it, and you don't have any right over it. You didn't own it back in the scenario when we're both standing in the wilderness. It's the same kind of thing. If you take your property away, which is the tree house, and just leave the tree, then that's just the tree again, you know. And if you left the land, that was just the land again. Because my issue with land ownership, because like I say, the dominion that I say you have over that tree while you're using it to house your tree house, and the dominion you have over the land while you're using it to house your property, is very much almost identical to land ownership while you're doing that. But the reason why I separate it from actual property ownership is you don't have to be using your house to own it. It's always your property. But you do have to be occupying and using that land, even if it's only with your property, for you to have that ownership claim. Because if you don't have any of that, then all of the claims that you had that come from property rights, certainly in my mind, kind of vanish away with that. Does that make sense? Oh, sorry, I'm not hearing you. I'm not hearing you for some reason. Having a sound problem, sorry.
I'm sorry, it was my problem. Do you
was
hear
it?
me now?
Yeah, sorry, I've unplugged
Yeah.
my mic because I thought it was my mic that was doing it.
It was my problem. I'm sorry because my sound was too loud and I was doing some changes here, and I probably well.
Can you
I
still
will.
hear me okay? Because I'm going through
Yes,
my.
I hear you okay, and this was purely mine. It was purely mine mistake I did here, because I have to adjust the sound a bit more carefully here. So I understand what you just said about, but it's just few steps further. I mean, like I would like to discuss this, but first I'm trying to somehow get the definition itself. Uh, let's get back to the treehouse. The one the one case is that you have a typical treehouse, like it's on the top of the tree, and you say you don't own a tree. But another case is that you have a house, but part of the house constructions are living trees. For example, you find, I don't know, a few living trees, and you build some walls, and then even the roof. So you have the house, and the living trees are part of that house. But you are saying that in this case, I own whole the house, including the living trees.
Yeah. Sorry, go
I
on.
don't know why. I don't understand why. I don't understand how it's possible that I can own the house, including the living trees, but I don't own a living tree with a tree house on it.
Because in the one scenario, the living trees weren't part of your property, they were just where your property was. It's just like the location that your property was sitting on. Whereas in this other scenario, the living trees have become part of your property. And to give you another example, which might explain it a little better, if we go back to the house on the land thing, okay, let's imagine you haven't built your house on the land, but you've dug your house like a hobbit style house
Mhm.
underground, and you've used some of the land as your wall. Why build a wall when you've got a wall already, kind of thing? Again, but the difference is in both scenarios, whether you're using the living trees to become part of your property or whether you're using the ground that you've now dug into to become part of your property, they are now part of your property. Like the property you've created is made in part out of them. So now they are like literally a part of your property. It's in the distinction that we've already made, whereas before it's just where your property was. Does that make sense?
So if you have the Hobbit house, you own the land around. I
Yeah.
mean, closely
Well, yeah,
around.
yeah. You own the land that is part of your Hobbit house because that's the house you've built and you've used the land. You might not have moved it or done any, like you've built into it. That's fine. And it's the same with the tree example that you've used. But it's now the house that you've created. It's now a part of that structure. So it's now a part of your property. But let's say the land going underneath that is just the land that it's on again still, and the
But
land around it is just the land that it's on. Now you can extend what you like, the area that you're, just like again how I'm standing in a spot. It doesn't mean I only have right over the exact millimeter where my toes touch the
uh,
ground.
but
Sorry.
wait a moment.
Yeah.
Let's say the Hobbit house. You have the Hobbit house. You own the walls. Do you also own the I don't know how it's called. The how it's called the land we are standing on. When you have house, it has walls, roof, and what's the bottom?
Floor.
Floor. I'm sorry. It just I know the word. I just forget. Do you own the floor also in the Hobbit house?
Yes.
But how is possible that you own the floor in the Hobbit house, but you don't own the floor in the normal house?
Well, you do own the floor in the normal house, but the floor, like the floor of your house, isn't the land that your house is built on. Like the
But when the floor is the land, what if the floor is we don't have there some concrete or something, but we have there just the dirt? So I built a house and the dirt. Do I own it in such case?
Yes, because in that situation, and this is just the way I'm thinking about it, and I invite you to obviously tell me why I'm thinking about this wrong if you think I am. But the way I'm thinking about it is the change you've made, like in the first scenario where I said the land underneath your house isn't your property, it's just where your property is, because your property is the house that's built on top of it. Now, obviously, foundations go into the ground and stuff like that. But again, it's just housing it. Now, if you've actually made the land your floor, just the same as making the land your walls. It's no different. You've made it part of your property. So now it is a part of the structure of your house. It's the floor of your house. It's no longer just natural land that your house is sitting on. It is now a part of your house. It's now a part of your property. But
Uh,
if you dug further down, let's say you dug further down and further down and further down, say like, a few meters and that, and you didn't know there was like an underground city underneath your house. Like what I'm saying is and eventually you're going to dig through their roof because they've used the natural area for their roof. Now you're invading their property. That's what I'm saying about like you own the part that is attached to your property and you have rightful dominion over even the unowned parts that are kind of occupied and used by your property. But that's where the line ends, and it ends there because of your property right. Ownerships over your property is the only thing that's giving you either ownership or dominion, depending on whether it's part of your property or just what's housing your property, over that area. But if you didn't have that, you wouldn't have the ownership. Does that make sense?
so basically, you are not saying that you don't own you can't own a land. You are just saying that you don't own a land by building a house on it, but you are also saying that you can own a land in some cases, like for example, if the floor of the house is just made of that dirt.
Yes, but the key thing is, in my mind, the key thing is in the second situation, the difference is you've made it part of your property. Like if you build a house on land, now, like I say, the dominion you've got over that land is very similar to land ownership in the sense of, you've got the same right over it, but it's attached to your property. You can't just own land on its own. It's got to be like it's got to either be housing your property for you to have a dominion over it that's like ownership, or to actually have it as property ownership, it's got to be part of your rightfully owned property. So if you build a house, all of the materials, including the pre-existing land that you've incorporated as like one side of your house, whether it's the floor, the wall, or the ceiling, it doesn't matter what part of your property is, but by definition, it's part of your property. Whereas by definition, if you build a house on top of land, the land isn't part of your property, it's just where your property is. And in many instances, it seems like a pedantic point because your rights over it are the same. But if you weren't there and you weren't using that land anymore and you didn't have your property there anymore, you'd no longer have a property right claim. Whereas if you weren't at your house anymore and you weren't using it anymore, it's still your house unless you outright officially abandon it.
Okay. So if I build my house from the land, from the dirt, like igloo, but not from the ice, but from the dirt, I owned that land. I own that dirt.
Yes.
Um,
Because it's part of
and
your property. You own what's part of your property.
okay, and if I, for example, build a tree house and uh, on the tree, I still own some parts of the tree, I suppose, which are part of the tree house. That you are saying this
Yes.
is, I don't own whole the tree, but I own the part of the tree in which I have the, for example, if there is some part of the wood in the middle of my tree house, I own this part.
Yes, because that's the wall to your house or whatever. So that's part of your property. But also,
Okay.
just to clarify, even the rest of the tree that you don't own as property, you still have a dominion over it whilst it's housing your tree house that serves virtually identical to land ownership while you're using it with your property, but it's not technically property ownership because if you removed all the things that are your property, then all of a sudden there's no reason why you would have a claim over it.
Okay, I understood your definition, and I think we both agree that we can't say the definition is good or bad. It's just a different definition, and we just can discuss how practical is use this definition or that mine definition. So I think I understand what you said. I am not sure why it's good to have it there, but I can't say like you have bad definition. You just have different definition of ownership than I do. But also I think it's more thing of measure, not principle, because I think that I consider the land under the house as a part of that house. You don't. So I think that when you have the house and the garden and the fence around, and I consider the even the land under the house as a part of that I don't know, of that object. Like there is the house, there is the land, there is the fence, and so on. So I consider it all as a part of it, and you do not. You just consider the fence and the house as a part of the property and the land as not. Uh, I consider it like that just because I think that it can be absolutely different house if you place it somewhere else. Let's say you would have a house with some pond on the yard and with some beautiful trees, and then you pick that house even with the fence and place it on the desert. I think it's just absolutely different house now.
Yeah.
So I consider also the nature part there as a part of it, and you do not. This is what we agree on.
Can
Okay.
I? Yeah. Can I just ask a quick question? just in online there. Do you consider, so going back to this situation where we're both standing in the wilderness and I say, like, you don't own the land beneath your feet, but you've got dominion over it while you're standing there, I can't push you off and take that spot. Do you consider the land that you're standing on to be part of you in the same way that the land that your house is sitting on is part of your house? Because that's why, just to give you an insight into my thinking on it and why I think I'm thinking about it correctly. Do you see what I mean? Because I don't consider the land underneath your feet to be all of a sudden a part of you. You still have a dominion over it and a right that's very similar to if it was, but it technically isn't. And if you move off that spot, it's, you've no longer got a right to it. And that's how I kind of view the land. So that's why I wanted to ask, if you're standing in the wilderness, we both agree that you've got a right over that spot because you're standing there and you're occupying it with your rightfully owned body. But my point is it's not a part of you. And if you move, that land stays there and you no longer have right to it. And that's my point with the thing.
There I see there a big difference because I am like movable object and the house is not movable object. So the fact that I build there some basis, some basement, something which the house is standing on, it's becoming a part of it. As well as if I would, for example, well, it doesn't make sense because I have some because I'm a human, so I need to move. But if I would, for example, had crippled legs and I build there some structure which would attach me to the land somehow that I can't move, I say it doesn't make sense. But if I would do that, I would consider now the land as part of me. As long as I am attached to it. So I consider the land as a part of the house because the house is connected to the land. And sometimes the house even can't stand somewhere else because it's connected somehow deeply to the land. For example, if you have there some slope and the house is standing to the slope and it can be somehow, I don't know, like really hardly fixed there. I feel like the slope is becoming part of the house. So this is my answer to it, that as you are moving human, you can't, the land under your feet is not part of you, but as you have some structure which is hardly attached to that land, I feel the land as a part of it. But it's absolutely okay for me that you just don't feel it like that, and we have just a different point of views to it. So the point is when some of my followers told me like discuss with the Matt the land ownership because he says that you can't own a land. But as you are saying it now, I wouldn't say that you say that you can't own a land. You are just not feeling the land under the house as a part of the house, which I do. So this is much lesser difference than I thought it would be. So this is what we agree on, right?
Yeah.
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 And now, okay. And now I want to ask you like why to differ the dominion and the ownership. Like I see your definition. I am like okay with this. I see it's consistent. It's like okay, but when you have two, let's say, consistent definition, um, I like consider which one to pick, and I would pick the one which is like easier, to handle with, and I think that the ownership. When you have ownership of things and property and land and everything, I think it's much easier to handle with it than if you have like two different methods how to have something. Like one method is to own it, the other method is to have the dominion over it. And I want to ask you in which way this is like more practical to use the dominion because in my point of view, in my, I don't know, in my feeling of ANCAP or non-aggression principle and so on, I don't have there any dominion principle. I have there only ownership. So you can own things or not own things, and if you are owning it, you can decide what to do with it. If you don't own it, you can start to own it if there is no other owner, and you can't when there is owner. and you are coming with another principle, which is dominion. So you have ownership and dominion, and then nothing. And I just see like it's one more step, which is making whole thing more complicated. And I want to ask you what this is good for.
Well, yeah, I understand where you're coming from, because it does, on the surface, it seems like it's adding complication, because you're like, well, we could just have ownership, and you were saying, well, let's have ownership and dominion. But one thing I would say is we already have these two. We only apply, generally, someone like yourself would only apply ownership to property. They won't mess around with this ownership dominion thing and land, and they just put it all into the ownership thing. But like with the example of, if you're walking around the wilderness and we both see each other, we've both recognizing the dominion that's attached to the area that we're occupying while we stand there, or if we go camping, or we have a picnic, and all these things. This is all areas where dominion is coming into play. Like even if we went your way with regards to the terminology to land ownership, we've still got the dominion distinction when it comes to other things. When like I say, if I'm going to have a picnic somewhere in the forest, I'm not claiming a property ownership while I'm having that picnic there. Obviously, my property ownership is over myself and over my picnic basket and my blanket, and I'm occupying and using it and all the rest of it. But as soon as I take my picnic and go, that's it. So that's one aspect I would say. I do understand, because on the surface of it, it feels like I'm adding complication. But I don't, from my perspective, I don't feel like I'm adding dominion. Dominion already exists. We're just not applying it everywhere we should be, in my view. And I'm saying we should be applying it to the land beneath our property, just like we apply it to the land beneath our feet when we're walking around in day-to-day life, or we're going for a picnic or camping or anything like that. So for me, the dominion thing still comes into play. We're just not applying it to kind of settled houses. Obviously the difference between camping is you're temporarily standing somewhere, or picnic or whatever, whereas obviously a house, you're kind of building into it. Now, one thing I will also just quickly add is the one area where I think we actually do agree even more than is evident by this discussion is this once it becomes part of your property thing. Because one of the arguments you gave for why you do consider the land to be ownership is because you view it to be part of the property. Now, I agree as far as I agree that it is actually part of the property. Like when we were saying, well, what about if the land is your walls or your floor, or the tree is part of your tree house and stuff. And then I'm saying, okay, well then you've literally said it's part of your property, so it's part of your property. But if it's just where your property is, then it's just where your property is. So that's why I make that distinction between ownership and dominion, because I feel like even if we didn't apply it to land ownership, we'd apply dominion to other things. And I still see that validity there, because if it's part of your property, then it's part of your property. You said it yourself. If it's just where your property is and just what your property is sitting on, or housing or built into, then it's some of it's part of your property, but obviously some of it is just what your property is occupying and using. And one final thing I'll add with regards to justifying why I have this distinction at all is this also provides the proper definition to separate valid claims over land, whether it's ownership or dominion, from arbitrary and invalid claims over land, like we've seen particularly in the past and throughout history, where kings and queens and lords and all the rest of it just enclose vast areas and start demanding taxes from all the people living there, and all these stuff. And that's my point, is one of the other things that this does, by having this, it seems pedantic a lot of the times, but there's certain areas where this distinction actually is important, because then you can point to the enclosure movement and say that's not valid, that's got nothing to do with property rights, because you've just arbitrarily claimed ownership over land, even though your property's not attached to it, you're not occupying and using it with property. So I think from a practical point of view, like me and you, even if at the end of this discussion we agree to disagree, me and you can still coexist in the free society that we're both fighting for, because the differences with regards to the terminology of, I call it dominion and you call it ownership, for all intents and purposes, it's operating on the same basis. But for me, that same definition is also drawing the line that distinguishes between valid claims and arbitrary claims, whether it is ownership or dominion. And that's my concern with going your way, is that How do we tell a king he doesn't own the forest? If
Well, in my way, there is also the way how to distinguish between uh, arbitrary properties and real properties. Like you can, it's about homesteading. You can homestead just what you use and what you somehow uh, use your labor on. So in this way, I have my definition. You also can't arbitrarily claim, because to start to own something, you first have to homestead it, and you can't homestead something just by saying it's mine. You have to do something there. So you have to somehow put your labor in it. So I think that this last argument you said, it's just not needed, because you said that there is a dominion because somebody is using it, and I say there can be ownership from just when the people, just when somebody is using. Of course, you can buy it from somebody who was using it before, but uh, if we are talking about some part of land which nobody owns, you can start to own it. You can start to own it only when you use it. So I think the dominion is not needed for this discussion. It's just solved by the homesteading in my definitions. So you can homestead something what you are not using, which is quite the prevention of king saying I'm owning everything. And moreover, even if the king claims this, there are still people who own some part of the land. So it's also invalid because of this. So I think we don't need the dominion term for this reason.
sorry,
But
sorry. What if the king claimed ownership over land that no one was currently living on, but it was a large
yeah,
area?
yeah. This is what I said. It's like let's say that you have a large land and nobody is living on there, and I say you can't homestead anything what you are not using. So you just can homestead the land, or not just the land, just also the trees and wood and the animals and whatever, as long as you are using it. You can't just. Say I own it as long as you don't use it. You can't say I own a moon or the sun or whatever, as long as you are not there to somehow put your labor in there and make it yours, as long as it's nobody's before. So I mean, my definition about this do the same what your definition with the dominion, because you say okay, you have dominion over it because you are using it, but I say you can start to own it just when you are using it. And now, of course, we are talking just about the things which are not owned by anybody, because you of course can buy something even if you are not using it, and if somebody else homesteaded it before you, you can buy it from him, and then it's yours even if you are not using it. I'm just talking about the homesteading. And second thing I wanted to say to that, you are saying that we need the dominion term anyway, but I don't think so, because if you are going to the wood, which is, let's say we have a wood that nobody owns, because when it's owned by somebody, I suppose that this discussion is just not applicable to it. So you are going to the wood which is not nobody owning, or you are going to the moon where nobody is owning it there, and you have a picnic there. I don't think you need the term of dominion for defending your property, because as long as the blanket and the food and the bag and whatever you have there is yours, uh, and if it's on the nobody's land, uh, nobody else can come and move your property. So you don't need the term of dominion, just because if I put there my blanket to the forest, which nobody owns, just if you would come there and move my blanket away, in that moment you touched my property without my permission, so you violated the non-aggression principle. So I don't think that the dominion term is in fact needed. Uh, like I don't say that it's wrong that you have it. Like it's okay, but I think it's just unnecessary, and I think it just makes things more complicated than can be. That just if you just use ownership and not the dominion of anything, land or any other stuff, it works perfectly fine, and I don't think you are getting any advantages by the using of dominion term, because everything what you mm, what you can have you can do by the ownership, and I don't think you need the dominion.
Yeah, okay. I mean, I get what you're saying. I still think you do need the dominion because I still think, like with the example of the picnic or the camping. I can't remember which one you gave, but it's the same either way. Like whether it's picnic or camping, you say, well, you still got the property right ownership over your blanket, or your tent, and these things. So people still can't interfere with that. And I'm like, yeah, but without dominion over the area you're occupying, they can invade that area if they don't actually touch your property. You know what I mean? And it's like, and I'm thinking, well, I'm still occupying and using this area. I don't own it, but I still want a right over it that's very similar to ownership while I'm occupying and using that area with my rightfully owned property. And the fact that I've got something protecting the individual pieces of property from direct contact and interference doesn't protect the overall area. I can't have a picnic in an area if someone can invade their area just because they're not actually touching me, or they manage to step around my blanket, and all of these things. The reason why we want to have land ownership or land dominion, whichever you want to call it, is because we understand that our property rights needs to extend to an area that we're occupying and using with our property, not just like the actual surface of our property. So it's like you've got personal space. You've got when you're standing in an area, you've got more than just the millimeters away from your heel and your toe that you need to have a rightful dominion over. And it's basically, that's kind of like the same kind of thinking I have. I'm basically saying, look, you need a ownership like protection over areas that you don't own while you are occupying and using those areas with stuff you do own, i.e. yourself and your camping stuff or your picnic stuff and all the rest of it. And I'm saying that rather than giving you some kind of quasi land ownership or temporary land ownership every time you want to go for a picnic, you can have dominion. And that dominion is exactly the same from all intents and purposes, in the way that it's attached to your, how you have to be occupying and using it with property. It essentially serves the same as what we're talking about with the land ownership. The only difference is the picnic or the camping is less permanent than the house you built or the farm and all the rest of it. But the basic ethos that you and even to be honest, just to further, from my point of view, strengthen my side of this, even the conditions you laid out, because I said, well, how are you going to distinguish what people can validly claim over? And even if you can do it with your definition of land ownership, and correct me if I'm wrong, it seemed to apply the exact same conditions that I'm applying to dominion, which is why I say, for all intents purposes, the reason why me and you could live in peace is whether you're calling it ownership and I'm calling it dominion, the conditions that we're attaching to it are essentially the same.
Yes,
I can't
yes.
come in and invade it if it's your dominion, and I can't come in and invade it if it's your property. And for you to call it your property, you're kind of saying, well, it has to be part of the property, which is what I'm saying. Now, I'm obviously saying it has to be like literally part of the structure of your property to be actually your property. And if it's just what your property is housed on or in, then it's just the area that you've got dominion over because it's where your property is housed on or in. So the fact that you actually have the same conditions as me, but we're just not using the word dominion or land ownership, depending on which one of us it is. And those same conditions, the reason why I, again, see it as different with the dominion over a land or a natural area, as opposed to what is actually your property, is because let's say you own a supermassive mansion that you just cannot use all of because it's just so big. So you basically don't bother with most of it. You have a couple of little rooms and you basically make a small house within a house. But the whole house is your property. The whole mansion is your property. But you're only occupying and using this other area. For all intents and purposes, the other property, you don't need it, but it's still your property. Yes. If we exchange that exact same example, but we make it land, then all of a sudden, like if you've got a great big mansion that say like, and there's a room that's 100 feet away from you that you don't go anywhere near or have any use or occupancy with at all, it's still your property because it's still part of your actually rightfully owned property. Whereas if you live on a bit of land and 100 yards away, there's a bit of land that, again, is nowhere near your actual property and you don't use it or anything, then you don't have any claim over it. So that's why I see, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, but from my perspective, we're applying the same conditions over where your rights begin and end. We're just using slightly different terminology with regards to dominion and land ownership. And when you ask, well, why bother with a different terminology? Why don't just always call it ownership? I'm saying, well, because there is a distinction. There is, very rarely does it seem to serve a practical difference, but there are extreme examples I can give you, like the super big mansion that you don't need to occupy and use, as opposed to the big area of land that you do need to occupy and use to have the same right over. And also the conditions that we're applying for you to have that valid right and why it ends and where it ends, and also the fact that I do still insist that we do still need dominion anyway with all these other walks of life, like with the picnic example and the thingy, because I don't think just saying, well, my blanket is protected because it's my property is enough, because you still need a right over the area that you're occupying and using with your blanket. So you still need to be able to say to people, you can't come in here and invade this area that I'm having this picnic on, even if you do so without directly touching my property. Just like I can say, you can't come on to my property and run around my garden and all the rest of it just because you're not touching like anything that I actually own as property in the area or farmland. You can't weed in and out of my crops because I own the crops, but I don't know, what I mean? It's the same kind of that. So for me, that's why we can't escape the dominion thing, because I think no matter how much you limit it to, like you might argue that, well, your right over yourself only allows you a very limited sort of space to kind of occupy, and I can stand within a meter of you, but I can't come right up to you, and touch you, or even not touch you, even get like close to in your face because I'm invading your personal space. You don't need land ownership for any of that, and I'm saying you don't need like land ownership to protect the land that you're occupying and using with your property, but you do need that dominion distinction to give you that kind of that distinction between where your rights end and where your rights begin, and it needs to be able to apply to things that aren't actually your property, that even you wouldn't claim is your, because I'm assuming you wouldn't claim that you own the land while you stand there, or you own the land that you're having a picnic on while you're having a picnic on there, but I assume, again, correct me if I'm wrong, I assume you would agree to the level of dominion that I'm talking about that is attached to what you do rightfully own, i.e. yourself and your tent and your blanket and whatever.
Well, I have the problem with the personal space as you are describing it. Similar problems as with the mental violence, like not non-physical violence, but like violence which is done on other levels. I have the same problem with this as with the personal space. I absolutely don't deny that it exists. You can use some like violence which is not physical, as well as you can definitely interfere with somebody's personal space. I absolutely agree that this is possible. However, I have a problem to include this into non-aggression principle because this is absolutely individual. Somebody's personal space can be 10 centimeters, somebody's personal space can be meter, and if somebody is agoraphobic or whatever, his personal space can be much wider. And I suppose that I wouldn't include this into non-aggression principle because in this case you're just putting the responsibility from the person who can have some specific demands to the others. I think that everybody should be responsible for his personal space or mental state and so on. And it should be your responsibility to somehow manage it with the others. And I don't like to transfer the responsibility from the person to the others. Like, what is the personal space? Is it like 1 meter? Is it half of meter? Is it 2 meters? And I think this should be always on the person who feel that somebody is invading his personal space to say something or do something or so on. Because if you include this into non-aggression principle, like invading somebody personal space is violating of non-aggression principle, it would mean that I would have to think for all the other people, like what's their personal space. And I don't think this makes sense. As well as the conflict between freedom of speech and like mental violence. I don't know if mental violence is the translation. No, how is it?
I
How is
think
it
I know what
called?
you mean, but yeah, I mean, I wouldn't consider emotional harm or anything like
Emotional,
that.
I'm sorry, emotional violence. I was saying mental, and I don't know the word in English. So emotional violence. Okay, so I suppose that emotional violence is something what can happen. You can have emotional bullying. You can have bullying which you don't even touch. You can have cyberbullying and so on. And all this stuff, I suppose they can't be included into non-aggression principle, not just because they wouldn't be real, or not just because they wouldn't make any harm. Many people says like the emotional violence is worse for them than the physical violence, and I agree. It can be like that. The emotional violence can be more painful than the physical violence, but you can't include it into non-aggression principle because the other people can't find out when are they doing the emotional violence. In fact, I like this example with myself. I am really doing some emotional violence to some people just by my existence, just by my what I'm doing, what I'm posting on the internet. A lot of people are really suffering just by my existence, and this is something what you just can't put this into non-aggression principle. And I think the personal space and the thing what you were solving with the dominion is the same. Like I agree that it's not nice to go to somebody's personal space, but I don't think this should be included into non-aggression principle because it's the same as with the emotional violence. Like the others should think or care about what's the personal space of the person, and they're like, and this is what I'm saying more for the viewers than for you, but I just needs to distinguish between. I am not saying that it's nice to violate somebody's personal space. It's for me, it's really bad, and I'm really trying to not do that. But I don't think it should be part of the non-aggression principle because in that moment, what if somebody says my personal space is 10 meters? Like, and why not? Somebody might even feel it like that. That 10 meters is his personal space, but then it should be his responsibility to somehow manage that 10 meters and buy some land where there would be 10 meters for him. And I think this is why we don't need the dominion with the camping or picnic case, because when I don't own it there, I can have the picnic there or camping or tent or whatever, and the non-aggression principle protects my body, protects my tent, protects my blanket, and so on. But if there is somebody who is acting somehow that I don't like it, but he's not interfering my property. He's just acting somehow how I don't like it. And of course, it can be really bad behavior. It can be some stalking. It can be some, I don't know, noise, or even the emotional violence that he can do things or say things which I find like harmful or they are not pleasant to me. In such case, I don't think that this should be solved by non-aggression principle. I think that the non-aggression principle is a method which like protects my property, but does not protect my mm, personal space or whatever like that. And these things, if I have some problem with it, I am responsible to somehow manage it. For example, to be on the property when its owner, it can be me or whatever, whoever else, is saying like that some behavior is just not acceptable there, and there's like a rule on that property. So I don't think we need the dominion for this case. And you are right. I absolutely agree that the difference between ownership and dominion is a lot of terminological, but there are some practical differences. But I think that the practical difference, like when I see the practical differences, I still feel the ownership without the dominion as a better and more working concept than the dominion. For example, because why there should be two different approaches to like ownership or dominion. Like when I own, I don't know, house, I can leave it there and it's still mine, even if I moved away and the house is still mine and nobody can, like, of course, that some commies or anarcho-syndicalists would say that they can acquire it as long as the person is not there. But we
We're
quite
not there.
agree. Yeah,
Yeah.
we quite agree that when there is some house, it's mine. I build it, and nobody can go there just because I am not there. Even if I am not there for winter, but also for a year or 2 years or for my entire life, it's just my house as long as it's there.
Yeah.
But I don't see any reason why this shouldn't apply to the land. Like you are right that what would be practically bad if somebody could start to own a land or dominion over a land just by saying that, like, this whole area is mine. Like this is bad. But when we don't have it there, like for the homesteading, you need to use it to have it. Then I don't see the difference. Why, when I, for example, build a house and I leave, nobody can take it. But when I, for example, use a land as a field, like I put there some plants and it's for me it's the same like owning a house. Like I build a house, I use it, and then I leave it for a year and it's still mine. And if I make a field, I create it and I put there some plants and then I harvest it and then I put it there again and then I go away for 1 year. I think it still should remain mine for the same reason why the house should remain mine. Like if I put there my labor and nobody owned it before, I don't see any reason why I shouldn't be the owner of it.
So with the field example, are you saying you've left it and you've taken all your property as well, like you've uprooted all your plants and all the rest of it? But the
Yes.
field was your creation though, like it
Uh,
wasn't already a field.
Yes, it wasn't a field. So you say that I own a field, like when I don't know, do there some work, like put there plants or something like that. You say that I start to own it by that, or
Well,
not?
again, again, this is where I draw the line with regards to some of it's your property. What you've created is your property, and what you've created and is your property sits on is just like the area where it is. So there's a dominion there that extends as far as it needs to, as far as it's attached to your property. Um, but if you, I mean, to change, just to help explain where I'm coming from, to change the example slightly, because I'm sort of saying, well, no, I think you do still have a valid claim there because you've created something there. So there's still property claim ownership. But let's just take an area. Let's just say it's just a land already. There's just land already. It's just a big area, like a giant mile-long field, but it's just land already. So you didn't have to do anything with it. And then you planted some crops or you built a house or you did whatever you done. But then for whatever reason, you took let's say you built a mobile home, like a caravan or something like that. And let's say you've uprooted all your crops, you stop farming the land and all the rest of it, and you leave and you take all of your property with you. Then I'm like, okay, well, then I don't see where your property ownership remains because you're no longer occupying and using it. Because the thing is and again, if I'm misunderstanding you, like, obviously let me know. But from my point of view, it's like we take this kind of, let's say we take this area and we both agree that the line of where our rights over it are the same. The only difference is within that area, I'm segregating what's your actual property and then what's just your dominion that you have rightful dominion over. And you're saying it's all your property, like, you know,
I
that's
need
kind
to
of
have
like,
a quick
sorry.
question
Okay,
about the field. Let's say I don't know how is the English verb for it, but if you take a plowshare and you change the land, how is it called?
Well, like plow it, you mean?
Plow it. Okay, yeah, okay. You plow the land. So you plow the land, and now it's yours.
Yeah.
So, but it's not dominion; it's a property, even in your terminology.
Well, again, it's the area that you've ploughed. Like you're kind of, it's more about, it is more about dominion still, because it's an occupancy and use thing. It's like, you know, you're using that area and you're occupying it with your property if you plant crops and stuff like that, or if you're ploughing it, like you know, because you could even prepare an area of field. And I'll give you a good example actually, because my mum has a field, because she has horses, and she sections off the field, like to leave some areas for the grass to grow and the horses can only graze and all the rest of it. Now you could say that the section that she's left to lay fallow to replenish, you say, well, she's not occupying and using that and her property's not there, so where's her dominion claim? I'm saying she is still using it, even though she's not using it in the kind of she's right there and then. She is using it because she's doing this rotation of fallow. So it's like with the farmland, if you're plowing some farmland and you go away and you leave it because you need like the area to regain nutrients, or you need grass to regrow, or you need some kind of process to occur for what you're doing, your occupancy and use is ongoing. You see what I'm saying? Like you're still, and that's, and again, and funnily enough, sorry, I'll let you kind of, I just want to add one final thing. This also ties back to why I think dominion is still needed, because you still need dominion where property isn't. And if you were doing something temporary, like the issue I have with your saying about like my personal, and so, sorry, I'll let you speak before I go into it, but I do I agree with you about emotional harm having nothing to do with the non-aggression principle, because I can exercise my, because for me the non-aggression principle is based on individual self-ownership. It's based on the fact that you own you and I own me, so I can do what I want as long as I don't interfere with your right to do, you know, to exercise the same freedom. So that's why we say my right to swing my fists ends at your nose, but I'm saying actually it doesn't end at your nose, it ends further away from your nose, because I don't just get to do this in front of your face as you're walking down the street, and as long as I don't actually make physical contact, you can, I'm not, you know, my point is you have a dominion outside of what you rightfully own that's attached to what you rightfully own, that whether it's personal space or anything like that we're applying with the property thing, that doesn't allow somebody to swing fists in front of your face. Now you could say, now your point is valid about saying, well, okay, yeah, but where do we draw the line? What if I say my personal space is 10 meters? What if I say it's a mile? What if I say, you know what I mean? It's like, you know, and this is where the grey area thing comes into that we've discussed before. And this is why I say we have to be able to draw a line, of like a black and white line where we have a grey area in between. So I can say, let's just say for argument's sake that we could say as some kind of, and it wouldn't be as simple as this because other things will come into play, but just to simplify the example, let's just say that we as a society agree the personal space thing. I know you don't, but let's just say that I've had my way and, and we've got it that way. And there's this personal space dominion that is protected by the non-aggression principle, and you're not allowed to invade my personal space. But you say the problem with that is, how do we define what your personal space is? And like a lot of things, it exists on a continuum. There's certain points where you can say, okay, you're definitely invading his personal space for anyone that accepts that concept. And then there's other areas where you can say, okay, you're definitely not, because you're definitely far away and they can't make any reasonable claim. And what I'm saying is that still leaves a grey area in between. You say, okay, well, what if they're in the grey area? Even if we draw those lines, which, and you might even pick holes in the drawing the lines part, but let's just say we draw the lines of, okay, this is definitely too far away for you to say that's your personal space, and this is definitely too close for them to say it's not. But what about that grey area in between? And that, and you did allude to this in one of the examples you gave, that is when self-ownership comes back in and says, well, okay, well, who has right to decide in the grey area? In that situation, It's the invader that doesn't have the right. So if you're standing there and I walk up to you, swinging my fists because I'm doing some kind of Tai Chi exercise or whatever, at a certain point, what I'm saying is, and this is the argument for Dominion, I'm saying before I hit you in the face, you can say I'm invading your personal space with my fist swinging exercise that I'm doing. But if I walk over to you, I can't say you're invading my space. So what we can say is we can say, okay, well, there is a limit of tolerance over like reasonable interpretation. So you can say your personal space, but you can't take the piss with it. And we can kind of draw a line at, say, however many meters where you're just saying, no, that's unreasonable. Just like you can draw a line in the other direction where we can say it's unreasonable for them to say it's not. But we're saying how we deal with the grey area comes back to self-ownership, because whoever's standing in that spot first has the right to declare his personal space, and then the person that invades, because I've had a similar question put to me one time when someone said, what if my neighbor is storing explosives in his house that I feel considered to be a potential danger to my house, even though he's not actually invading my property, I consider the threat. And I say, well, it depends who was there first. If he was already living in some house with explosives that say carry a sort of certain level of that, radius of danger, and then you move to him, then you've got no right to complain. But if he moved next to you, and it's whoever's a bit like moving next to an airport, you can't go to a nuisance and call it a nuisance. You can't go to somebody and say, I often see police videos where a police will step up to somebody and tell them to get out of their face. And it's like, well, no, you got in their face. So you are the aggressor. So you can still have this personal space. And I take your point that the problem is there's a grey area of what is personal space and where the limits of that. And that's when I go back to my previous discussions about, well, we can draw a universal line of kind of limits of tolerance that creates a grey area, and then we can still use the concept of self-ownership to dictate who has the overriding authority in that grey area. Sorry, I went on a bit.
There's a lot of things which would lead probably to a deeper discussion, but I just want to disagree with that. You can draw the lines about a personal space, because the problem is that it's really very individual, and some people would have the personal space really little. Probably you would even find a person in the world whose personal space would be just 0 centimeters or millimeters. So if you find at least one person who would have personal space 0 millimeters, you would probably not be able to draw a line, because the line have to be universal. If we are talking about non-aggression principle and this stuff like drawing a line and so on, they really have to be universal, like universal for everybody. So as long as you find at least one person whose personal space would be less than 1 millimeter, or at least one person whose personal space would be more than few meters, and I believe that you would find such people in whole the world, I believe you can't draw the lines. Because
sorry to interrupt, but you can still solve that with the who come to who issue. Like if you own you directly and I own me directly, you say, well, who can say my personal space is only a centimeter from my face? Well, that's fine. If I walk up to you, you can say, well, I don't consider you invading my fence, but if you come up to me, then it's about what I consider my personal space.
But there is the problem as with the emotional violence, that you should assume how big the personal space is about the other people. So you transfer the responsibility from the person with the personal space to the other. And now this is exactly the same problem as with the emotional violence. Like you can't say, don't do anything which can harm somebody emotionally, because you can't know what it would be. As well as you say, don't do anything which would harm anybody's personal space. It's the same problem, because you just don't know how big personal space it is for which person. And you can have people who had really few meters long personal space, and you just can't assume it. So I feel here the same problem as with the emotional violence, that you just can't draw the lines, not even for emotional violence and not even for the personal space. It's just not possible, according to me.
Well, sorry, go on.
But I just want to go back to the field and the house.
All
I
right,
just
before
don't
we
see.
do then, can I just, because I
Okay.
have a point to make on the thing, but I didn't know if you were
Mhm.
finished. The emotion, I agree with you that emotional harm isn't to do with the non-aggression principle, but not for the same reasons that you've given. Like, I don't, the reason why emotional harm is nothing to do with the non-aggression principle isn't because of the assumption problem in my mind. The reason why it's nothing to do with the non-aggression principle is because I am like if I say something that offends you, all I'm doing, I'm exercising my right of individual self ownership, and I am not violating yours. Like your emotional harm is totally your own internal thing. Now, I do take your point about my definition of personal space is still like
You
my
can
own.
say that it's your internal thing.
Yeah, you can. But what I'm saying is that issue isn't the reason why emotional harm isn't a violation of the non-aggression principle, because I haven't aggressed against you. I'm just exercising my own individual self-ownership, expressing opinions or whatever. You don't have to listen to me. You don't have to take any of it in. Like your emotional thing is nothing to do with me. Now, the reason why I consider the personal space issue different is because, I mean, for one thing, from a practical point of view, I
I
would
think.
argue that. Sorry, go on.
Uh, I think it's the same. Like if you are on the street and somebody is talking, you don't have to listen, but you have to walk away to not listen. And if you are there first, and you like you're on the street, you are there first. I will come there and I will start to say some of my opinions which you don't like. Doesn't mean that I am violating you, and doesn't mean that I should walk away. It means that if you don't like what I'm saying, you should walk away. Of course, if there is no rule of the owner of the street. But let's say that we are in neutral space, which is owned by nobody. You are standing there, I come there, and I start to say things which are emotionally unpleasant to you. And I suppose that in such case, I shouldn't be the one who would go away. As long as it's not your property or not property or somebody who is saying that I shouldn't do that. In such case, you are the one who should go away or somehow do it inside. And again, I am not saying that it's nice to go to somebody and say something but is
No,
making it
yeah.
unpleasant. But from the point of non-aggression, like the non-aggression principle should be the necessary minimum, not the non-aggression principle isn't like the moral I am following. It's like the minimum of it. And I don't think that the emotional violence or personal space should be accounted into this minimum just for the same reasons.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, but the reason why that doesn't fly in my mind is because like the problem you're raising is a problem that applies to both, but it's kind of independent from the whether you're violating the non. Because the thing is, I could violate the non-aggression principle, or I could encroach on your property without knowing it. Let's say, for example, go back to the Hobbit house for a moment.
Yeah.
Let's say I'm approaching your Hobbit house from the
Hmm.
back, and to me it just looks like a hill. I don't know that it's your
Yes,
property,
I see.
and then you come out and say, "Oh, you're standing on
Uh-huh.
my
Yes.
property." Oh, I'm sorry, and I immediately get off because
Uh-huh.
now that you've informed me. Now, prior to you informing me, I don't think I did anything wrong because I had no way of knowing I was on your property. But once you told me, "Oh, this is my roof," and now I've been made aware of it, then I have to get off. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes,
So it's
I
the
see.
same with the personal, like so having
But I don't think it's with the personal space, because what if my personal space is 10 meter or 1 kilometer or whatever like that?
Well, that's why we need that limit of tolerance that I'm saying about differing interpretations, because a lot of things exist on a continuum. You'll never escape the grey area, which is why I have this whole line in the
Yes.
sand thing. And that doesn't get rid of the grey area. What it does is it just draws a limit of tolerance to how much we're allowing the grey area to extend. And then once we say something is a grey area, we still can decide who decides within that grey. So what I'm saying is like, let's say we say, just to put some numbers on it and make it simple to kind of, at least for my brain to work it through. But let's just say we have some kind of universal standard where we say, look, you can't say that unless you're doing some kind of activity, if you're just standing there, you can't say that your personal space is more than 5 meters. Right. And any other person can't argue that your personal space is less than 1 foot. you know, like with regards to thingy. So that's our grey area, is 1
Yeah,
foot
but
to
I
5
just
feet.
don't agree that we can agree on that what is gray. Like, I think that the gray area in this case is so wide that it's quite for nothing good to have the lines there. Like, I agree with you that we have there a big gray area, but I think that if we should apply some universal ethics, the gray area would be so wide that it would be like I don't know how to say that. It's so wide that it's not usable for anything. Like I agree that, for example, you can draw some lines, but I think that like everything in practical then will be in the gray area. So I don't think it's so
But
much useful.
I don't think that's true, because, and I think this continuum problem exists with everything, like whether it's age of consent or, like, you know, noise and levels of harm and stuff like that. So we never escape that. I think we always have to create a little grey area where we draw limits of tolerance at either end, because the problem is imagine we lived in a world, let's just say we lived in my incarnation of it, and you're walking down
But
the street. Sorry, go on.
so, I just want to that age of consent and so on. I don't think there is some age of consent. I think that this is purely
No,
individual and that you can't
well,
make
I
age of
agree, but
consent.
that's my point. It's not because it's not an exact science. We have to admit there's a grey area. We have a continuum problem. We know that there is a point where you're too young to consent, and then we know it's more about not being able to, but it is generally correlated with age to a certain degree. Obviously, people. It's not, but it's not an exact number. It's not an exact science. There's a grey area. We have a continuum problem. We can say that a 30-year-old man who's not got any mental defects or anything that we can point to is obviously, he's well in the, you know, black and white area of it, and we can say that like a young baby is definitely in the other end
But
of
I don't agree so much because if you want to have universal moral, you can't do that because this 30 years old man can be in the state which is making him to not able to consent, and it can happen anytime. And he doesn't have to be mentally ill. He can be incredibly tired, or he can be whatever. He can be emotionally unstable. It doesn't have to be mental illness. He just can be, or he can be drugged or whatever. He can be in some condition that he is just not able to consent, regardless to his age.
Yeah, but you would
And
have to. What I'm saying is, I'm not saying that we're drawing universal age lines or anything like
okay,
that. I'm just using that as an example of describing somebody who
okay,
would
hmm
obviously be
okay,
versus somebody who would
yeah, okay,
obviously not. But yeah, no, I totally agree with you. It's not. It's not necessarily a purely age thing. There's
hmm
other factors that are
yeah,
all coming together. But generally speaking, most 30-year-olds, unless they've got some other issue that you
okay,
mentioned, would be certainly in that area, and
yes,
most
okay,
babies, unless there's some kind of weird
okay,
mutant that's
yeah,
advancing
exactly.
fast,
Hmm.
would be in the other one.
Yeah,
So what I'm saying is we don't have that that luxury of exact science with all these things, and it's the same with the personal space thing. But that doesn't mean we don't have a distinction between the two extremes, just because there might be a massive grey area. I mean, what I'm saying is your point about the age of consent just further adds to my point about the personal space thing. We still can have the distinction, even if the grey area is massive and involves so many factors. So I'm not, when I talk about the 5 meters versus 1 feet, I'm not on about us establishing some universal numbers of 5 meters versus 1
hmm
feet. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying, let's say, for example, in a scenario that, like, you're in a park or you're in some area and some guy is juggling grenades that have got a
hmm
blast radius of, say, 30 feet, then all of a sudden you don't want that person 30 feet from you, you know. But
okay,
my point is if I'm if we, even if we create a gray area, we still have the problem of who gets to decide within that gray area. And I'm saying that self-ownership still gives us the answer to that. You know, so no matter how big the grey area is, if we
okay.
admit that it is a grey area, then we're saying, okay, well, it doesn't matter how, you know, it's still within the reasonable realms, you know, but we can still draw a line and say, no, I don't care about your personal space thing. That guy's a mile away
No,
from
no,
you.
no.
You can't
I,
argue that he, you know. So that's my only point on that. Sorry, go on.
uh,
You want to?
as well as uh, I wouldn't consider age of consent at all. I would just consider if the person is able to consent or not, but I absolutely wouldn't. The age can be something which is correlating with it, but that's all. It's just correlation with the age. But so age
But
of
I'd say the
consent.
same thing about distance, though. I'd say the same thing
Yeah,
about the
yeah,
distance.
That's yes, exactly. But that's why age of consent is absolutely something what I wouldn't apply to NAP at all, to non-aggression principle. Like age of consent is something what has just nothing to do with non-aggression principle. With non-aggression principle, there has to do if the person is able to consent or not, but it's absolutely can't be like judged by the age. So I think that you are right that those two things are similar, but I think that as well as the age of consent has nothing to do with the non-aggression principle, then some distance in meters about the personal space doesn't have nothing to do with non-aggression principle. I just think it's just like we can't apply it to.
Can I just clarify? Because are you saying? Because I don't think that age of consent has nothing to do with the non-aggression principle. I'm just saying it's not the only deciding factor regarding whether the like there is such a thing as, for example, like there is such a thing as child abuse. There is such a thing as as someone
Yes.
who can't consent, who's having something forced
Yes.
on them under the pretense of consent.
Of course.
So for me, age of consent is attached to the non-aggression principle in that regard. But I take your point that it's not in the sense of the age isn't what was actually deciding it. It just happens to correlate a lot of the time. In some way, but it's not. And I'm saying the same thing applies with distance. Yeah, we can say the same thing. Distance isn't like, so you could say that personal space isn't a non-aggression principle in that way, but I can say, well, it is in the sense that you can violate the non-aggression principle by violating. Sorry.
I wouldn't differ between child abuse and personal abuse, like person's abuse. Like the point of the abuse is not the age. The point of the abuse is the non-consent. So
no, but whether or not it
so
is
there is
abuse would
child abuse.
depend on the capacity to consent.
Yes,
I mean,
that's
sex
true.
is an
But yeah,
obvious thing.
exactly. But there you said there is a thing like child abuse, and I agree there is a thing like child abuse. But I would be more general. There is a thing like abuse, and the point of abuse is that you didn't have the consent, and I think it doesn't matter if it's a child or not. The thing which matters is the consent, and of course, there is some correlation between the ability of consent and the age. I absolutely agree, but that's all. And I think you should judge it individually for each case because you just can't have the age of consent. You just have the ability to consent.
I agree, but I
individual.
think you should play the same thing with the personal space issue because it's like, well, I'm saying with this, from my point of view, there's still such a thing as personal space, just as there's still such a thing as someone who can't consent. Now, it often correlates with age on the consent thing, just like it often correlates with distance on the personal space thing. But what I'm saying is they're not. I agree that they're not the defining factors. But what I'm also saying is the fact that it's such a something that you would have to take on an individual basis, and there's multiple factors that are coming into play, not just one. I use the age and I use the distance thing because I can put a number on it and illustrate my grey area thing. But I do fully accept that these things wouldn't. There's other factors that come into play and all the rest of it. But my point is that the personal space, doesn't become invalidated just because of this big grey area that's made up of multi-factors. Just like the whole concept of someone being unable to consent to, say, sex, which would make it rape, doesn't become invalid just because there's multiple factors to deciding that as well.
Yes, but for the non-aggression principle, to abuse somebody sexually has something to do with her physical property, with his body. So if you, I don't know.
Well, no, I would dispute that because I would say that the only thing that's different really is the consent. Like rape and sex are physically the same thing.
Yes, but you have to do the physical act to violate non-aggression principle. If you, for example, make a porn and you put it on the internet, and then little child sees the porn, it can be bad for the kid. It can be somehow emotionally harming the kid, but you can't say that you abuse the kid because you put your porn on the internet. Even if there can be real like emotional harm for
Yeah.
that kid.
We're on the
And
same page on emotional harm, so
yeah, exactly. This is the point that I think that still should be physical to violate the non-aggression principle. There should be some physical interaction, because in other ways it can be like bad, but it's not the non-aggression principle violation. But
But my
if you
point,
want mind,
sorry, but my point is that that's not what's deciding it. Like the physical action isn't what's deciding it. It's
it's not
your
the only.
capacity to consent. Yeah, your
It's not the
capacity.
only, but
Yeah.
it's the necessary condition. Like, I mean, it's not
With your
deciding it.
consent, I could invade your personal space.
Yes, but
Without
if you
it,
yes,
I'm saying I
but if
can't.
you don't consent to invade, if there is not the consent to violate the non-aggression principle, you have to physically do something, because if you don't do it physically, it's not violating of non-aggression principle, even if there wasn't the consent. This is what
Yeah,
I'm
but
pointing.
invading personal space is still physically doing something. I mean, obviously, we have an issue over the not recognizing
Yes,
personal space
yes,
versus
this
recognizing
is
it.
okay. Okay, well, I think this is something what. Yeah, I think we are getting still to the same point. And for me, the personal space is something like emotional violence, and you can. There are ways how to protect yourself to it, mainly when you are on your property or on somebody else's property. Like, for example, the problem of stalking in anarcho-capitalism society. Uh, you can say, if you are just stalking, you are not violating the person. But uh, if you are stalking, you are doing it on somebody's property, and the person can have the rules that you can't be stalking there. So it is solvable, and I think this is the same problem with the personal space, because the rules about the personal space can be given by the owners of the property, and the only problem when we are solving it is on the nobody's land, which is really rare problem. I'm not like saying not solve it because it's rare, but I just want to say that that we are that it's not like that the personal property that the personal space wouldn't can't be protected according to what I'm saying. I think it can be protected as well as your mental health and other stuff can be protected. Just you use the rules of the uh,
So, how
space.
would you? How sorry? How would you? Oh, and this is a practical question. I like to stay with principles, but I've got an obvious practical problem coming
Mhm.
in my mind. How would you do anything about somebody who is just going to wave their fists in front of your face?
Well, and this is yeah okay. This is something else. I think this is absolutely another question, and my solution for this is like uh, this can be considered as an attack, and you can defend yourself even before the hit lands to your face. I mean, like it depends on context, but if somebody
Okay, what if
draws a
the
gun, if somebody draws a gun at you, you can shoot. But of course not if you are playing a theater and he draws a gun because it's his role. But if you are going on the street and somebody draws a gun at you, you can shoot back even before you get shot,
yeah?
of course. So if somebody gets with his fist to your face, you can defend even before you get hit, because it's the attack. So
What if they just got in your face?
what if they?
What if they just got in your face? So they didn't do anything like that you could argue
Yeah.
was
Okay.
like an
Okay.
attempted attack.
It again depends on context. So there is many contexts in which I believe you definitely can defend, uh, and it then depends. Like there is also some gray area, because this all of this like attacks, not attacks, are depending on context. Sometimes it's purely attack, sometimes it's purely not attack, and sometimes you just don't know. And going to your face might be attack, might not be. It depends on the context. Like for example, if it's, I don't know, a good friend of yours and you are usually doing this like fun to each other, it's obviously not attack. But if it's I don't know, a strange person in the middle of the night who comes to and do this, I would consider it as an attack. And then you have the gray scale
But
in
it's
between.
like,
But
I mean, similar to the example I gave of someone accidentally walking on your roof because you've got a little hobbit home that looks like a hill or whatever. It's like, I don't see the problem, because my problem, because like I say, even though I agree with you on the emotional harm thing, my problem with how you attach it to like the reason why, and that same reason applying to the personal space, because you don't know what's going to cause someone else emotional harm, you don't know what their personal space is. I'm like, well, that's not a decider, because you might also not know that their roof is that hill over there. But as soon as they tell you, then you've got to get off, and if you don't, you're trespassing and all the rest of it. And it's the same with the personal space thing, because until they tell, just because they might need to tell you because you can't read their mind and know that it is, that doesn't mean there's not a violation there. I know it doesn't necessarily mean the other either, but I'm just saying that the reasoning that, because like I say, that the emotional harm thing doesn't fly for me, because you're not doing anything to them, you're just exercising your own thingy. Whereas I know, obviously, for me to say you are doing something to them in your personal space, you've got to presuppose the existence of personal space. But the thing is because the way I look at it is like, if in Nap World or the Nations of Sanity Revolution or whatever, we have a scenario where someone's invading somebody else's personal space, the person who's invading can say, well, I didn't know I was invading their personal space. And the other person says, okay, well, now I'm informing you. Can you please step back a foot or something? And you do, then, or say you don't, and they push you back because you don't, because you're in their face, and I would say the person who pushed the person, as long as they did it after they informed them that they were invading their personal space, would have a right to do it. But what I'm saying is there is a limit to that, where that person has the right to decide within the grey area what's his personal space. But at a certain point, he can't say you're invading my personal space. And then I'd have to ask him to justify it. Well, in what way is he? Like what? You're just standing there and he's like 5 meters away from you. Well, you could do anything and he's not getting in the way of it. Now you could say, oh, I'm having a tennis game with that person over there, and that's why he's invading our personals. You know what I mean? What I'm saying is I take your point that it's not an exact science, but I'm saying that exists in all sorts of things, whether it's consenting to things and stuff like that. We've got that continuum problem. That's one of the things that I present my Nations of Sanity project for, because I don't feel like the continuum problem is dealt with really by our kind of movements. And I do feel we have to draw a line and say, well, look, there's this grey area where reasonable people can disagree, and we've got to respect the fact that no one has a supremacy of rights. So where there's reasonable like degree of differing interpretations, we've got to go back to self-ownership and just say, well, who has the greater right over that grey area? Who was there first and all the rest of it? But we've also got to draw a line, otherwise we lose the distinction entirely.
There's a lot of things I would like to say to that, but for like, I don't know, 15 minutes or more, I want to get back to that field.
Sure. Yeah.
So I tried it once, and I will do it now, and I know that if I will react to this, we will probably never get back there. So the field. Why? If I plow a field, I don't start to own it. But if I build a house and the floor would be the dirt, I start to own it. I don't see the difference. Why?
Sorry.
Why I start to own the dirt if it's the floor of my house, and I don't start to own the field if I plowed it?
Well, because again, you've got dominion either way. So for all intents and purposes, your rights are pretty much the same. But the difference is if the field is the floor of your house, it's part of your property. If you're ploughing a field to farm on it, then you are occupying and using that field, but it's not your property. Like you might be putting your property on it, and like I say, the dominion you have over the area is as valid as a property ownership would be, in the sense that you have that right. But it's just technical. I mean, like I say, in a lot of these instances, like the ploughing instance, the difference is like a technicality. It's just a word difference. The practical
But
difference.
no. There is practical difference
okay.
because when I leave it, then it's mine or it's not. So
What
there
do you
is
mean, like physically leave it?
Yes.
Well, because if you
physically leave it even with my property, like if I stop to use it, the difference if it stays mine or not.
Well, I mean, if you plow a field, with, I mean, some people might, there's, again, this is the thing, you've still got to inform people or whatever, and there might be a reasonable grounds for people not knowing that it's your field or whatever. But if you plow a field, but then just decide, actually, I'm not going to bother and go away and leave it and all the rest of it, I mean, someone, the due diligence would be to check with you that you're not like, you plowed the field and you're not waiting for nutrients to return so you can plant some crop, so you're still using it. I mean, the whole point of like occupancy and use is you don't have to be physically, and this is why, again, I think Dominion is important, because you don't have to be physically like at that exact spot to have that dominion over it. Like, we need to be able to say again, it's like a completely unknown, there's an unknown field in there. We want to have a game of football. You know what I mean? Now, we can say we own ourselves, we own the football. Does that mean people can run onto the pitch and interrupt our game because they're not touching us or the ball? No, they're getting in the way of our entire football ground. It's kind of like a similar thing with the field. You don't need to own it as property to have the dominion because you're using it.
No.
Sorry,
but wait. You said that if I build a house and its floor is the dirt, I start to own it, not dominion it, own it. Yeah. So it means that as long as I destroy the house and move it away, it still remains mine.
If you destroyed the house?
Yes. That remains mine because I started to own it, not dominate it.
I see what you mean. So you're saying, like, you build a house, the land is your floor. So by my reckoning, the land is now part of your property because it's literally part of your property. Yeah. But so then you remove all of the rest of the property and leave only that land.
Yes. So it should be still mine because I started to own it.
Yeah. I mean, the only problem with that is it's no longer part of your property then, is it?
Yes, but as long as you start to own something, there is no more condition to own it. Like the difference between ownership and dominion is that the dominion, when you stop to use it or the condition change, you are not dominating it anymore. But as long as you start to own it, it's just yours, regardless of what happened then. So if I build a house and the floor is the dirt, and I start to own the floor, the dirt. In this case, I start to own the land.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. I mean, I suppose I need to add other details to the example to kind of be precise, but I suppose in my mind, you like you own that. You own the floor of your house because it's the floor of your house, like it's part of your property. You take all of the other parts of your property away, and then you just leave the land. Are you still using it? Mind, I suppose that doesn't matter.
I think it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter because it's whether I call it property or whether I just call it your dominion or not.
As long as I call it property, it's just mine, and doesn't matter if I use it. If I have there another property, it's just property.
I might need to ruminate on that a little bit because I don't have. I'm leaning towards saying that it wouldn't be your property. It would just be land that you might potentially still have dominion over if you're still occupying and using it.
But in that case, all that start of our conversation wouldn't be true because we said that if you have a floor of your house as a dirt, you own it, as well as if you have trees as a part of your house, you own them. But this clearly implies that even if it's then not anymore part of your house, you still own it because otherwise it would be dominion and not ownership.
Yeah, I suppose I understand what you're saying. I suppose the only thing that I'm struggling with in my own mind with regards to how I'm processing it is like you never actually separated that ground from the natural environment. You were just using it to be part of your property. So it was your property while it was part of your property, but now it's no longer part of your property. But then I'm thinking, well, but then you're saying, I know what you're saying, because you're saying, well, yeah, but once it's become part of your property, how can it revert to not being your property anymore unless you're officially, explicitly abandoning it or something? So I do get what you're saying. That's why I kind of like feel like I need to think about it a little bit. And maybe it is your property. Maybe I should say that, yeah, that area that I'm not 100%. It's something I need to think about
Yeah, but
because
in this case, I feel some practical problem of your definition that anytime I own a land, I can say that once I had there some facility over it, so it's mine. Uh, and uh, and I can do a lot of other stuff how to make it, because uh, the that it would be just the floor of the house is not the only one way how to make it part of my property. So then it's just about that. If people will create the way how to make the land as a part of the property, they can just do it, and they start to own it, and then it would be just about like say, okay, this was a part of my property, so it's mine, or it wasn't. But I think this is like really a very unpractical definition of anything, because then like, do I own my garden? Well, it depends. If once I build there something, which for example, I can build there that greenhouse, you know. So if you have greenhouse, the land is a part of it, so it's the floor of it. So I start to own it, and then you know, like.
yeah, I do get what you're saying. I'm not so sure. I mean, that's kind. I mean, funny enough, that the problem that you've mentioned is kind of why I'm reluctant to call it your property once it's no longer part of, your property. If it's complete, because another example, because I'm trying to apply similar examples and see if I can work it out. But it's like I'm using another example of like, perhaps imagine you've got like a mountain or like a cliff edge, so it's like relatively
Yes.
straight, so again, you don't own that mountain, but you decide to build a house up against it, so that the mountain is the one of your walls. It's like the
Yes,
back of your
exactly.
house. If you take the entire, so again, that has become part of your property because it's the wall to your house. If you then remove your house and leave that area with your house, take your house with you, is that side of the mountain still your property?
If it
And
wouldn't
I
be,
don't think it is.
if it wouldn't be, it would be Dominion for all the time.
Yeah. Well,
So, so,
well, the reason
so we
why
are getting back to the start of the conversation where
I push back against that because the only reason why I'd say no, that's not the case, and you might say that this isn't overly convincing, but this is just my thinking on it, is the reason why I call it your property while it's part of your property is kind of the clue is in the sentence. We're saying it's part of you. Like we accept, both of us accept that the house is your property. Like all the other walls are definitely your property because you created them in the normal property rights way. The reason why we find the land as the floor or the mountain as the wall thing difficult is because with my whole dominion thing, I'm saying, well, if you just put your property on it, then you've got dominion over the area, but you don't actually own it. You just got dominion that's very similar. But if you actually make it part of your property, like then you own it because it's part of your property. But from the way I'm justifying that ownership is I'm saying you only own it because it's part of your property. And unlike all of the other elements of your house
but then it's
that
exact
are
Dominion.
your property, even if you move them.
But then it's exact Dominion. Like you are using the word own, but it now meets all the requirements for the Dominion and none for the property. So if you like, as I take your definitions, not mine, but your definitions. This cliff with the house, if you are describing it as you are, then the cliff meets all the dominion requirements and not the ownership requirements. So in this case, it doesn't make sense to call it ownership because it has the dominant properties and not the ownership properties. So
Yeah, I do see what you're saying. I mean, that just makes me rather than making me reconsider my whole Dominion ownership thing, it
okay.
really just makes me reconsider whether I was right to call it ownership because it's part of your property. And maybe you're right that maybe I should have just said it's always Dominion until you actually separate it. It's always Dominion, and the ground. I mean, from the reason why don't see this makes a difference practically speaking is from a rights point of view, the same thing as applying. You know, what I mean, like whether it's Dominion or ownership, your rights are basically the same. Um, the reason why I was calling it your property is because you're literally saying, well, now you've made it part of your property, so it's part of your property. You know, like we're
But the
almost
problem,
saying that.
well,
But the
the
problem
problem
is with the mount. Sorry, the problem is with the mountain though. Like, say you've built like a house, like a house without a back wall that
Mhm.
you use the mountain as your back wall kind of thing. And I'm saying during that time, maybe I'm wrong to call it property. Maybe I should just call it Dominion from the start. But my point is either way, whether I'm saying it's Dominion the whole time through, which might make more sense to you with regards to keeping that consistency, or whether you say it's Dominion, but whilst you make it part of your property, it's part of your property and
well,
your property in that sense. But what I'm saying is either way, if you take the rest of the house away, all of the other bits that aren't the mountain, and you leave just the mountain, would you argue that there's a valid ownership claim over that side of the mountain, like
that's a
property?
pity. That's a pity because if I would know this, the whole my argumentation during whole the call would be very much different. I was counting with what you said about that the land and or the tree and so on is your property as long as it's part of your house. But as I see it's not, then I would hold a call, probably discuss about what means the separation and trying to point out that the separation is not. I don't think that the separation is like a valid
But
point
I understand what you're saying,
or
but
whatever.
that's using my definitions, using like your own definition, where obviously you don't have this dominion
Well,
ownership
I was trying to use
separation.
your definition, but
Yeah, no, I understand.
understood
But
it
I'm just
wrong
curious as
because
to how you would approach that with your, like, 'cause obviously we've been discussing how everything applies with my,
well, my
side of
definition
things.
would say that you are owning it all. You are owning the land under your house. You are owning the cliff like behind your house. Of course, you are not owning all the mountain if it's like huge
No,
mountain, as well as you don't own like all the space from your garden to the
but
center of the earth.
let's say that this part of the mountain that's your property, that I'm saying is only your property or dominion, I'm still unsure on that, whilst it's part of your property. But what I'm saying is when you remove that factor, that it's no longer part of what like how you first made it your property in our conversation was by attaching it to what we both unambiguously agree is definitely your property, i.e. the rest of your manufactured house. What I'm saying is if you then take that house and remove it and you're no longer occupying and using that area, that say there's like a square of this cliff face. The reason why I'm then thinking, well, maybe it was just Dominion, because now you've taken all that away, I don't see how that's your property anymore, because it's no longer a part of what your property. I know what you're saying with, well, once you've claimed ownership, once it's become part of your property, how can it cease to be? And that's what makes me think maybe I'm wrong to ever call it your property, and it should have always just been Dominion, and and you just incorporated it. I mean, the problem is look, maybe it's just the word games we're playing here with the language of saying it's part of your property, which makes me think, well, then you own it because it's part of your property, and you own your property. So that's why I'm kind of getting a little bit not sure. But from a practical point of view, and this is using your worldview now, you take that house away, but there's still this cliff face that was once a part of your property, or was once, you might say it still is. That's what I want to ask you, but it was once a wall of your house, so we were both agreeing that it was property. But now I'm saying you've gone away, and now that's just the cliff face again. You know, it's not your property anymore because it was only your property, or you only had dominion over it, whichever one is true,
but the same,
because of that attachment. And now you've lost that attachment, whereas any other side of your house would be your property even without. Does that make sense?
If I build a table, the one leg of the table was once wood, and it wasn't my property. Then I destroyed the table, and I have the leg again. I think the leg is still mine, even if I destroyed the table. So if I just use the wood to create table, the wood became mine, and if I destroy the table, the wood is still mine. And I think it's the same with the cliff, because I don't see any reason why to distinguish between the wood and the cliff. Just as
Well, the wood is more like the stone. It's not the cliff, is it? You know what I mean? Like if you took, say you took the stone out of that cliff and made a wall, then the wall is yours.
Yeah,
but what I'm saying is it's still, I'm not saying I'm right or wrong here. I'm not arguing the point. I'm just sort of clarifying where I'm coming, how I'm thinking about it is that, if you don't actually make it a wall, like a wall other than putting your house to it, and you move your house away, it's no longer a part of your house. It's no longer a part of your property. So you haven't made a wall out of the rock from that cliff face, because then that's different. So like the wood from the tree, the wood is always yours because you created that. Even if you destroy the table, you still separated that material. Whereas, let's say, use the same example, it's like there's a tree stump or whatever, and you've used it as one of the tables to your table leg, of your table legs to your table. You then take away the table, the rest of the, destroy it, move it, whatever you want to do with it, and then you just leave the stump there. What I'm saying is that stump's not your property, even though it once was part of it. Sorry,
I just don't see why why the separation would be so important. I think that the thing which is important is that your labor was somehow add to that natural resource, and I think that the ownership is created by that you add your labor to some natural resource, and this is the point for me. And if you separate it or not, I don't think this is important, because I don't see any reason why the separation should be important. I know that you can define it like that, and I have nothing against you add their separation to the definition. Like, okay, I can't say like it's inconsistent or whatever. It's consistent definition, but I don't see any reason. I see reasons why adding your labor to that nature resource would make that nature resource yours. I see reasons for that, but I don't see any reason why there should be the condition of separation over more. I just think that if we just not add there the condition of separation, we would have much easier and less complicated system, which would be more, I don't know how to say that, more understandable, and there wouldn't be any problems with that. And I don't think that I think that if you add there the condition of separation, it's like consistent, it's like okay, but I think it doesn't help anyhow, and it just make problems and complicated situations, but it doesn't solve anything. So I don't just see the point why to put it there. But I absolutely agree that you can have such a definition. It's like okay, but for me it's just unpractical. I would even I would maybe get to the finish visit, because we are here also for 2 hours.
Can I just ask? I just want to ask one question so I can get a good understanding of yours. Just go back to that cliff face example, because this is just this might not, but it might allude to why I think the Dominion thing is important. Although I do think it's important for things like personal space and the other things, but I understand if you don't agree with those. But with the cliff face one, and this is using your definitions now and your thing, like your worldview now, and we've had your revolution this time. So so the house, my house without a back wall that I've put up against the cliff, and now the cliff, whether it's dominion, ownership, whatever, the good thing about our differing positions is, for most things at least, possibly all things, but certainly most things, where we, from a practical point of view, where we're saying rights begin and end is essentially the same. Whether we're calling it dominion or ownership is, often less important. But the one area where I wonder whether it is important is like in this situation, using your worldview, I take my house away. Is that part of the cliff face? That's still just part of the cliff face. I've not separated or anything. I've not built a wall. It's just part of the cliff face. Is that part of the cliff face that's now just part of the cliff face again? It's no longer a wall to my house because I've moved my house away. Is that still my property if I've, completely separated my,
Yes.
I'm not using it or anything like that. It's still my property.
I
No
think
one
so.
else could come along and then put their house and use
Yes,
that same part of.
I think so. Also because if it wouldn't be, then if I wouldn't remove my house, but some flood would take it away, and all the house would be taken by the flood, and just the cliff would be there. I think that I should be the one who has the priority right to build there because I had there my house. So if my house got destroyed by some nature forces, I should be the one who has the primary right to build their new house, not somebody else, even if
Yeah,
my
but
house
to
is
be
not
fair,
there.
my dominion would give you that same right. I just
I
mean
don't think
like,
so, because if your dominion is saying that if there is not my property there and I am not there physically, it's just not mine. My ownership is like
well,
your.
no, because I said the dominion applies if you're occupying or using. Like I said about like when I gave the example of having a field that you're laying, you're allowing to grow the grass to grow because you're grazing, or you are using it. You might not be in that kind of direct, immediate sense that like some simple-minded person say, well, you're not
But how
physically
long?
there, but you are.
But in what time? Like, it's should I build it in a month or in a year or in 10 years? Like with the ownership, is quite clear. I can build it there whenever I want or never, and it's still mine. And until I die, it's still mine. And when I die, it's transferred to somebody else. But in the meaning of ownership, I can build it there anytime I want. For example, I don't have money for a new house, and I'm somehow not able to do it, but I want to do that. So I can earn the money for another 5 or 10 years, and then I can build a house, and it's still mine. But if I would just dominion there, what does it mean? Like when somebody else can come there and build their house? I don't know, but it doesn't make any sense to me to make some arbitrary time.
Yeah, no, well, no, I mean, I agree with you. I wouldn't do an arbitrary time thing either. I mean, in my mind, the Dominion would still protect the land because you are still using it. You're going to rebuild your house. You had your house there before. It's not the same as say.
But what if not flood take the house, but I take the house with the intention to build another house?
Again, you still got Dominion over that because you're still
Then why we should distinguish between dominion and property if I in any time can say I have still dominion? Like if the dominion, it's not you can't recognize it by I am there or my property is there. You can recognize it just by my that I just express my will. Then it is ownership. It's not a dominion, because you said that the difference between ownership and dominion is that the dominion is whenever I have my property there or I am standing there, well, which means I have my property there because I am owner of
yeah.
my body. But there
Well,
is a problem.
occupying
I
and
said
using. I did
use,
say
yeah, yes,
occupying
exactly.
and
So,
using. Yeah.
yeah, but if the difference, if I can keep my dominion just by expressing my will, then the dominion is the same as the ownership, because I can also say that I don't own it anymore and somebody else can start to own it. So I can dismiss the ownership as well as I can dismiss the dominion. And in that case, there should be no reason to distinguish between it, because if my dominion is staying there, even if my house is not there, it is in fact property, because if it's my property, I have it as long as I am expressing my will to have it. And with the dominion, if it is the same rule, then there is no reason why to call it dominion, because you can call it property as long as you don't point some difference.
I understand what you're saying, but all I would say is that the reason why I have that distinction is because your dominion or your right, let's just use right for the one that's obviously over both. So your right over that land is still attached to your occupancy and or use of that area with your rightfully owned property. It's so like so what I'm saying is it doesn't matter. It's not so much about like you know there can be a gap how long it takes you to build your house, or like I say, if you're leaving land fallow for to replenish so you can then crop rotations, all these, there's all sorts of reasons why your use might not be immediately obvious with a physical presence but is still valid, but it's also still attached to your what I'm calling your actual property. Like your dominion is still attached via your use through your actual property. I've plowed that field and I'm gonna plant crops there after a season of it replenishing nutrients.
But in this problem, like when the flood take away the house and there is just a cliff and nothing, and I have done no property, the only way how to find out if I am still using it, it's not that somebody can see me use it. It's just that I express my will that I want to use it. But there is no difference between the ownership, because I have the dominion over the cliff. There is no of my property. There is just the cliff and nothing, and I have the dominion, and I can keep the dominion as long as I say it's still mine, or I still dominate it, or whatever. And this has no difference from the property, because if I have it as a property and some flood take it away, it's mine as long as I say it's mine. But when I stop to care, somebody else can take it. So,
but I know what you're saying, but your
I
dominion,
just abandon it.
sorry.
If I abandon it, then I just abandon it, and and it could be property and dominion. So if it's like this, that I from the originally, when we were talking, I am just more and more finding out how you think it. But when we start to talk, I thought that you said that that for the dominion, you have to have your physical property on it. I even remember, as you said, that if you move that house away, then it's not you don't have the dominion there. But now we are getting to that I can take the house away and still have the dominion, which is then like pure ownership to me.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. I do get where the confusion is. I mean, just to clarify my comment with regards to if you move your house away, I don't mean like if you move your house away because you're going to knock it down and rebuild another. Like you're still using it. It's not like it's like I meant if you moved your house away and just left, that land is no longer your land, because again, you're not, you haven't, you're not attaching it to any occupancy or use. So,
but
like
what do you mean the left? What do you mean by just left? It means that I'm not physically there.
Well, no, it means you've left, like as in
I abandoned.
Abandoned. Yeah, I suppose so.
But this is exactly it's exactly the same for the property. When I abandon my property, it's not mine anymore. So if I thought that the point of dominion is that there is my physical presence or physical presence of my property. But if it's not, then as I abandoned it, it's not mine anymore. But if I abandon my property, it's also not mine anymore. So
well, no, because that's why I say occupancy and use, because occupancy would imply that you've literally physically got to be there. Use doesn't necessarily imply that, because you, like, for example, and I know this might seem a little bit of a stretch, but try to bear with me. But for example, imagine we're having a game of football in some natural area or unowned area. Now, obviously, we're only occupying whatever specific area we're occupying, but we're using a larger area. But and that might be our goal or whatever, and someone might come in and start setting up a picnic in our goal, and we're like, well, no, we've got dominion over this. We're and that's still attached to what we do rightfully own, like us and our ball and all the rest of it. But so we've got to still be occupying or using the area with ourselves, but we don't have to be physically occupying every.
I understand, but I don't understand where is the difference between dominion and ownership, because as you say it now, the dominion ends by you abandon it, but the ownership also ends by abandon it. So
sorry, I know what you're saying. I don't mean to interrupt, but it's just I understand what you're saying, but it's like the abandonment, like if you you like to abandon your property, your actual rightfully owned property, you've got to explicitly do that. You've got to actually explicitly, you know, dissolve yourself of. You can't just say, like, for example, if you just like abandon in another sense of the word, like leave your car somewhere and just leave it and just don't use it anymore and just, you know, and all the rest of it, somebody else comes along and thinks, well, this car's abandoned, but they haven't explicitly confirmed that with you.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So that's the kind of difference. Like with the like the land thing, say you knock a house down, you haven't abandoned that land, you're going to, you know, do something else with it or whatever. But you need to, for you to have right over that land, you need to be doing something with it, with something that is you or your rightful property. Not in that exact moment. Like you don't have to be there doing it that time. Just like I don't have to be in the goal at that exact moment in the football match.
The problem is that for the other, like the only difference would be in your head, but the other person don't see it to your head. So this difference is not visible from the outside world. It means that I don't see any reason why to distinguish between ownership and domination, because from what you said now, the only difference is in your head and nowhere else. So for me, from the outside position, it's absolutely irrelevant if you own it or if you dominate it, because you are the only person who knows if you abandon it or not. So in such case,
I understand, but you're sorry. Go on.
No,
I was just going to say that
it's for me it's more and more useless concept, because I see that now it's the only difference in your head if you still dominate it or own it, because the other it's not helping to those people to orient in the world. Like the ownership is great, because like the reason why we have ownership is that we solve it the conflicts of scarce resources. But the dominion is not solving anything more, because if I still dominate it, even if there is not my house anymore, and I just am willing to build that another house, then this is absolutely not helping anything over the ownership, because I can own it, and it would look exactly the same for anybody else except of me.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. I mean, for most intents and purposes, from a practical point of view, there is no difference between dominion and ownership, which is why I can understand why you think, well, it's like a distinction without a difference kind of thing, and it seems a bit pointless. There are some areas where I think it comes into play, like, you know, like personal space, like camping and picnicking and stuff. And I just don't see a difference from a property rights point of view, from regards to the point of your the legitimacy of your claim of right over an area of land that you've built a house on. I don't see how that's different than an area of land that you've built a tent on for your camping trip, outside of the temporary versus permanent nature of it. So, like, I do understand what you're saying. A lot of the times it just seems like a pointless distinction, because from a rights point of view, you know, like I say, in the world, if we both lived in either world, there's going to be very little difference with regards to our, you know, like and all that. So I do understand where you're coming from, and I can understand. I do still. I don't understand why you don't see how it applies with things like, you know, like the picnic and the camping and stuff like that, or even the personal space or the standing on a spot and all of those things, because that's why there's a difference. Even though from all intents purposes, me saying I own this land while I stand on it, but then I don't own it when I move away, is no different to me saying I have dominion over it while I stand on it. From a rights point of view, it is no different. But I suppose, and this is just how I justify it in my own mind, my point is if I craft a sword and I put that sword down and move away from it, it's still my sword. And unless I explicitly give it away or say I don't own it, and, you know, like explicitly remove my ownership, then, you know, my ownership claim over it is always there. Whereas with the land thing, both from a principle point of view, because as I say, I can't see how the land around your house and underneath your house is any different between the land underneath your feet or your tent or your picnic basket, in the sense of your kind of, it's not property kind of thing, but it's just where your property is and it's what you're using and all the rest of it. But the other aspect of it is like, sorry, I've lost what I was going to say on the
Well,
second
for
bit.
the other people, you also have to explicitly call the abandon. It's because if you have there the house at the cliff, then you destroyed it or flood take it away. I If I go there and build there my house, and you said no, 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 I meant it like I will build another one, I would have to remove my house. So it means that for the other people, you have to explicitly abandon it anyway. Like for you in your mind, you don't, but for any usage in real world and for other people, you have to explicitly call it as well. So that's why I don't think there is a difference, because you said, okay, the one is that I have to explicitly say that I abandon the sword, but I don't have to explicitly say I abandon the land. That's nice. But as long as you don't say it and I come there and I build there something and you say I still have domination there, I have to move away. So for me, as a other user of the world, I also need your explicit consent to build
Yeah.
there. Otherwise, I'm risking.
I think if your house got washed away, you would need to do something to like establish that you're still using that area to rebuild your house or whatever. Because the problem is imagine in your world you go to build your house up against a cliff and use it, and you don't know that someone had done that previously and their house had got washed away, and you don't know.
Yes.
So who's in the wrong there? Like could that person come up to you and say, hey, that's my side of a wall
Well,
that
you
you're
have
now
some
using?
cadastre of you have some register of the land, so you look there and you are finding who is owning it. So
Okay.
like this. But as I say, even with this, even if I would know, again, it's no difference between dominion and the ownership. Uh, Either I know that it's somebody's and I don't care if it's ownership or dominion, because if it is, I can't do anything with it there. Or I don't know that, but there is still the same. I don't know it, so I build it there, and I will have to leave if the person will come back. So in the thing is that if the domination works like that, there is a difference in the mind of that person, but there is no visible difference for the outer world, and that's the reason why I wouldn't use this concept. And like if you wouldn't mind, I would somehow end the call. Like if you want to say something, I of course let you to say whatever you want. I just I have another two recordings here today, and I want to be a little bit mentally fresh.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
I really like to talk to you after a very long time. And you wrote me that the land ownership would be just a small topic, uh, and you said that you had another topic. So if you want to, we can discuss another topic. You can write me or whatever. And if you have some topic which you want to discuss with me, we can do it again in a few weeks or month or
Yeah.
something like that.
Okay. Yeah. No, that sounds great. Yeah, I'm happy to wrap the conversation up. One of the conversations I'd like to have about you is about privatization, and I'd like to get your views on that. So we'll perhaps save that for another conversation, and perhaps we could even revisit aspects of this, because you've given me a lot of food for thought, and I hope I've given you some as well. So I'd like to sort of go
Yes.
through some of that and and think about it and let it ruminate and all the rest of it. I'll give a little kind of parting kind of final word sort of thing, because you've given me things to think about with regards to that. All I would say is I do understand where you're coming from, and I even say myself, a lot of the times it's a distinction without a difference with regards to the dominion, and it is just how I'm interpreting it in my own head. To justify that interpretation, I point to things like, if you're going to go camping or if you're going to go picnic, I don't see how you're use of the land is essentially any different to building a house there outside of how long you're there. So that's why I think, well, you've only got dominion over the land. It's not your property. You're just dominion over it while you're there, kind of thing, while you're using it. Sorry. And that's kind of, just to summarize my own view, that's kind of why I transpose the same thing to, you know, the land around your, you know, your property, like your house and stuff like that. The only other problem that I'm not going to, you know, carry on the conversation, but perhaps leave you with to think about is I still don't see, like, because there's not many problems it solves, because like I say, for most points, it's the same, whether it's dominion or land ownership. We're just calling it something different. The difference is only in my head and all that. But there are certain areas, and I do think that the dominion property distinction does better protect against arbitrary land ownership claims. Like I talk about the whole thing of like, because you still got to attach it to something that we are more unambiguously agreeing is rightfully owned by you, like yourself and your property, and being used by that. And I do, my concern about the land ownership and not having this distinction with dominion and stuff is there are a lot of people, even people that call themselves ANCAPs, who will defend the enclosure movement, who will defend what I consider very which I don't want to extend the conversation, but I even think you would probably agree are not valid ownership claims. Even if you agree in land ownership, I think you might agree that a lot of the ownership claims that we have in our current world, a lot of the people that own all these stuff, they don't have a valid ownership claim over it. You know, there's people that own like the Grand Canyon, or they own the, you know, and I just don't see how that jives with property rights. And I just think that this dominion property ownership distinction, when we apply it to land, does provide some kind of clarity and a new way of thinking about property, in the sense of demanding that it always comes back to property rights that come from our self-ownership. And it's very black and white with a house you built. When it comes to the land you put that house on, I don't feel like it's so black and white that it is actual property. And that's why I like to use dominion, because I still think that most of the norms and rights that come with property ownership need to be there. So that's why I characterize dominion in such a way that, to your mind, it's almost, there's no point in having it because it's the same as ownership. But that's just why I kind of have that distinction. But you have given me a lot of things to think about, so I'm always keen on challenging myself, and that's why I was keen to have this conversation with you, because there's only so much my own brain can give me in regards to challenging my own ideas, and obviously somebody else can give me a different perspective. So I appreciate that, and I look forward to speaking to you again.
Okay, thank you very much, and I'm looking forward for our next conversation. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.
Bye.